Now we should be working there. Gotta love technology. And I don't need to monitor that, so I'm going to turn that off. Welcome, everybody, to the first ever Invisible Ground live stream. Like I said, I'm kind of figuring this out along with the rest of the world. But what I kind of wanted to do tonight was a few things. One, experiment with format. Liz, I hope you can hear me now. I think that was a technical issue I fixed. I get the messages on a 1.5-minute delay. You should be hearing me now. I'm going to wait and make sure that is true before continuing to speak. We are live. Thank you, Bart. So yeah, welcome. If you're just arriving, this is meant to be a casual thing too, so I expect people to pop in and out throughout the hour. But welcome. I'm Brian Costco. This is Invisible Ground in a slightly different way, and I'm excited to kind of speak to all of you from this space that I've been existing in for the last 18 months or so. Doing this work, and instead now I'm talking to all of you through YouTube, which is pretty cool. So what I want to kind of do tonight, and yeah, DJ Bardicus, first of all, I want to point out that this is a rare opportunity where DJ Bardicus was notified that I was live streaming. So I'm glad you are here. I feel like you owe me one. I feel like I've been in some live streams. But yeah, you can get a shout out for Nick Montine for sure. What's up? That's from DJ Bardicus. So what I wanted to do tonight was a few things. I wanted to kind of experiment with this whole format and talking to people about my show and the work I'm doing and the work I'm going to be doing for my thesis here for the next year. Also use it as an opportunity to maybe kind of point people in directions of some ways they can help out, of course. But also eventually in the future, I think when I do these, it's going to be other people coming in too. And so I hope on having guests. Dan, that is probably true. I'm probably just coming through on mono. But having guests come in or people that are collaborating or working on this project or involved with these topics in some way too. So, hopefully in the future it won't just be me talking. But for this one, I wanted to share a story with you, which I'm going to play here in maybe 10 minutes or so. That's from an upcoming episode, the next one of Invisible Ground, and talk about it a little bit because I hope that people have some questions or some things about kind of how that happened. And beyond that, what I wanted to do too is just a general Q&A. So if anybody has any questions about the show or about what I'm doing with my life and this project, or any aspect kind of public history or audio or podcasting, please feel free. I can see the YouTube chat. It does take about a minute or so to get to me, but I can see it. And again, I thought the Q&A was an experimental thing. It never works for my undergrads. They often don't have questions when I ask them if they have questions, even if later they realize they do. And I understand you all are not being graded, of course, but you're less on the spot. But I do like questions and comments about things, or just, stuff that you want to talk about that's related to this world. Part of my work in doing this podcast is to connect these things, people and community and place and event, and bringing kind of history and sometimes even global and national big things into these spaces that we live and exist in, and in hope kind of making them, hopefully more real in the process. So yeah, feel free to send along questions. I also, if you can feel free to message me in different ways too, trying to keep emails and various things open, but that would probably be the best thing. So before I get into sharing the story with you here in a few minutes from an upcoming episode, I want to do a bit of housekeeping and also maybe a bit more explaining. First of all, if you came early to this, or before you saw me on here, you heard some music and saw some photos. I want to credit, there's a lot of music that's various pieces from the show. But that, as a musician myself and a creator, I have to make sure to plug those people. So you probably definitely heard stuff from Keith Hanlon and Dead Winds of Summer, Weed Ghost, Todd Jacobs, Matthew J. Rowland, I believe, was in there as well. So please, I always try to share some of that stuff from our social media too. But if you like the music of the show, that's going to be something that I'm going to try to dive into as well a little bit more with things like this. And then also the other bit of housekeeping is that you can support. This is not shilling too much for this, but everything's marketing. You can support the podcast, but also this associated thesis project, which I'm going to talk about in a minute at these links. I always wanted to do this right below here. You can find our Patreon at patreon.com/invisibleground. That's a monthly donation, so you can do as little as $1 a month. You can cancel it anytime, and you get some cool stuff. You get some behind-the-scenes things. You get the joy of helping a graduate student make a giant project. And you get to support this show and these stories. Also, there's lots of free ways that you can support this show that are also important, like writing reviews and doing ratings, subscribing, sharing it, telling your friends about it, screaming about it from your window, whatever you feel like is the most appropriate. And there's links on all that down here too. You can go to findinvisibleground.com is my site, and there's some other stuff on there. But of course, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all those places as well. So before I go into the story, and again, if you're just joining, I'm going to start a new audio story that's from the upcoming episode of Invisible Ground here in a few minutes, that I'm really excited to talk about and share with people. It's still being worked on a little bit, and it actually is something that we'll be going back to in future episodes, and I'll talk about that after. But the last bit of information I kind of want to babble about before I play that and hopefully answer some questions too after that, is I kind of want to explain what I'm doing right now with all of this. So of course I have this podcast, Invisible Ground, that I have 2 episodes up of now, and I'm working on the 3rd, which should be here in a few weeks. But related to that, the reason I'm doing that is because for the last 2 years, since fall of 2019, I've been in an MFA program at Ohio University in the Scripps College of Communication, a really, really amazing program, which I can also talk about too, in addition to the other stuff afterwards, if anyone has any questions. And in that, I've been teaching a lot, and I've also been delving into these 2 kind of new or more focused different areas of media for me, which are publication design and audio storytelling, podcasting. And then in that program, which is kind of designed for people that are trying to jump from one creative process to another in their career or whatever, you also pick a context area. So something who's going to inform your work, right? So mine, and it will come as no surprise to those folks who know me and the kind of stuff I'm into, was public history, and this idea of storytelling and history taking place outside of, say, the classroom and museums and designated places. Not that those places can't be involved too. So that sort of started me a couple years ago on this new trajectory. So for those of you who might know me from the Opera House or from Nelsonville Music Festival or playing music or whatever, this has sort of been my new world for the last couple of years. And the show is something that I've really been enjoying. It kind of combines all the elements of that, but it was never designed to be a regular podcast. So that's why there's 2 episodes over the course of the last 8 months or whatever. It is a laboratory, and it is something that I told a friend earlier, I'm just doing while I'm also in school. If I would have waited for not being busy with school, this wouldn't have come out for a while. And so I saw it as something that would keep informing my work and teaching me things and allow me to experiment with my stories in the way that I wanted to tell them. And it's been a blast doing that, but it also ended up informing my thesis project, which is what I wanted to kind of address quick. So Invisible Ground, besides continuing on as a podcast, is also going to have an sort of a production, my thesis production for my MFA program, my master's degree. is going to be an extension of Invisible Ground and a production related to it. So I'm still in the works on figuring out a lot of that. I don't want to talk about too much of it. If you're a patron on my Patreon, over the course of the next, however many months until April, you'll be seeing a lot about it. And I mentioned I will bring people onto here to talk about it too. But what I will say is that it's a project that is different than the podcast, but is related to it. In a general sense, what I'm hoping to do is create a sort of interactive historic markers. And I'm going to do one for April, but it will be under the guise of Invisible Ground. And the idea is, again, trying to figure out new ways to get people to engage with their community and their history and the stories around them. And so what better way to do that than to let people physically get transported through their smartphone to a place that's different from the past, making it a little more real. And of course, along with that, which there's a lot to, I'll be doing audio stories related to that location, and then hoping to continue this kind of work in the future. But I want to give everyone an idea, like, besides supporting the podcast, which of course has not only expenses, but I'm trying to kind of start a new thing here. Your support of that Patreon is also supporting this large production that I'm putting together over the course of the next 7 months. I kept saying 9 months the other day, but it's really actually 7 months. So you'll be hearing much more about that as I go on in the future. But that's something definitely, if anyone that's on here that's watching has questions about, I'd love to talk about after we play this story. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm having flashbacks to teaching online. I'm a TA in person this semester, so I've kind of, last year was the teaching online, but now I've got the Zoom face going. I'm like looking at stuff. We all know someone had to tell me I was muted earlier. So the next thing I want to do, I mentioned I'm working on the 3rd episode of Invisible Ground right now. In fact, I'm editing it not as we speak, but I've been working on it quite a bit. And it features, the main feature story in that episode is the Tablertown story, which I did a video about, and which I highly suggest people go check out. David Butcher's and all the other great events going on for that this Saturday out in Kilvert and Stewart. I'll try to post that in the chat too, but that's the main feature. That's not what I'm going to be playing tonight. The story tonight I originally did for a class actually in the spring, for a multimedia production class with my in school visual communication, and the assignment was to create a short audio piece. And so of course I wanted to try to do something for the podcast, and I had this idea I've been kicking around for a while. But short's very difficult. One of the nice things about Invisible Ground is that I can expand these things as much as I need to. And this had to be 3 minutes or less. So that's where this story came from originally. And for those of you who are listening on here from Athens, you may recognize these people that are in this story. And this is probably going to take me 1 second to get this going. But I'm going to play this story. It's about exactly 3 minutes. The people that have supported Patreon, it is available to them right now on there. And it'll be in the next episode of Invisible Ground here in a few weeks. So I'm going to share with you now. I got to bring it up. But this story is called... Hold on. You're probably going to hear me say one word first, and then I'm going to have to restart it. But the story is called Bobby. Coleman bought a house a few years back here in Athens, Ohio. In every community, the history of the people who came before you can be present in many different ways. Sometimes literally. In every community, the history of the people who came before you can be present in many different ways. Sometimes literally in your own backyard. My friends Missy Pence and Eric Coleman bought a house a few years back here in Athens, Ohio. Usually after a new home purchase, a few surprises always come up. Maybe it's a roof that needs replacing or a window that won't stay open. But for my two friends, their discovery was a bit different. Here's Missy to tell the story.
I found out about it the first day that I came to look at the house. At that time, I met the neighbor. She saw me snooping around. She came out to talk to me about the house. The thing that I found maybe the most interesting about this particular piece of property was that it was once owned by Margaret Boyd, the first woman to graduate from Ohio University. And apparently her house sat in what is now our backyard. So our house wasn't built when she owned the property. It's newer than that. But there are the remnants of her house back there, a chimney. Beside that, it was pointed out that there was a gravestone back there. It's just kind of an interesting conversation piece to mention to people that there is a gravestone in our backyard.
I asked Eric what he remembers about his wife's initial reaction to the house and the first time she mentioned what was in the backyard.
She was just out running around one day and came and looked at the property, came home, and right away I could tell that this was a place that she was in love with. And I pretty much knew that we would end up buying the house within the first 3 seconds of her talking about it, just because of her enthusiasm and how much she loved it. And in that enthusiasm was also, and there's a body buried on the property.
We all headed up that hillside behind the house for a walk through some recent snowfall and icy ground so that they could show me the spot. The gravestone is prominent, with the name Bobby very clearly chiseled in the front. Other than the lack of a last name and the years of birth and death, this would not look out of place in any cemetery.
Gravestone appears to have been knocked over, so it's lying flat, but I think it probably stood upright. It's about a foot by 2 feet. So, I mean, it's hard to say if this is where if it got moved to this spot in particular, or if this is where it's always been.
This is such a direct connection to the past. And even though the property and house are known to be from the Boyd family, there is still so much to this story. How does Missy feel about having this in her own backyard?
I love the connection to the history of Athens. Well, I'm certainly excited about the Margaret Boyd aspect. I've just been curious about the whole story the whole time and have always been hopeful that my friend Brian would.
The story is far from complete, and hopefully we can spend some more time researching and investigate who exactly Bobby might have been and if he is involved with Margaret Boyd and her family. Sometimes that thread that runs from the past to the present, it may just go right through your own backyard.
All right. So that was Bobby. A very challenging story to tell in 3 minutes. Thank you to Missy and Eric for talking to me about that and taking me up to go see where Bobby's at. I guess right now I again want to encourage anyone, if you have any questions about that story, about this crazy project that I'm trying to do, about the podcast or anything, feel free to put them in the YouTube chat. If not, I'm just going to keep talking. I'm really good at that. So I'll try to kind of in the meantime hit on some of the things. I wanted to share that story. Sherry said she can hear me from the living room. That's good. And the left channel, probably. That story was crazy for a few reasons. One is that it didn't really have an ending. When I started working on it, when I came up with like wanting to do that for an audio story, usually, and I taught students about this at OU and in Nelsonville, even in the storytelling classes I worked in, that, you have this sort of, no matter what kind of story you're telling, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's some sort of linear, or if you're Quentin Tarantino, it's like an end, a middle, a couple beginnings, then back to the middle. But even those, have a clear beginning, middle, and end. You can mess with that a little bit, but that's what stories are. That's how we relate to them. That's how we connect to them. And so, most of the things I've been kind of doing are not only about, delving into these topics, but I do kind of want to have stories that people can connect to and relate to. And so this one is weird because it ends with, of course, I don't know who Bobby is or was. Missy doesn't know who Bobby is. Eric doesn't. And what's crazy, and this is kind of why I wanted to play this and talk about it for this live stream, is that nobody really does. I want to keep going back to this story in future episodes, but it's been a really interesting experience. I don't know how other people that do this kind of work or do research or make podcasts or audio stories do their work. I have some idea of different ways that people use templates and ways that people try to do things. But for me, there's a process that kind of goes into digging around a story, and I'll research it and I'll work on it. And like I said, maybe try to fit it into this sort of idea of how's this going to flow, what's going to happen, who are the characters, right? But with Bobby, what's crazy is I sort of like had it wrapped up. Like the other thing that I think you end up having when you do this kind of work, at least for me, is you have sources, right? You have people. In a world lately where it seems like experts get a bad rap or people don't pay attention to them as much as they should, for me as a storyteller, as a person that's working on getting a story told in a documentary fashion where I'm interviewing people and I'm looking for things, right? I need sources. I need people that I can rely on. I need people that know stuff. I need the experts. They're very useful for the work that I do. And here, it'll come as no surprise probably to anybody that knows this kind of stuff. The two people I go to right away are Jessica Siders and Tom O'Grady. That tends to be who I go to. And Jessica's the current director at the Southeast Ohio History Center. And Tom, of course, was the longtime director and still very much involved there. And, between the two of them and the people they know a lot of stuff, or at least where to find it, right, when it comes to things like local history. And I started talking to them about this, and, the first thing is to look at these W.E. Peters maps, right, this guy that we highlighted in the first episode of the show. And Graves not on that, right? And read as much as I can read about Margaret Boyd. No reference to anybody named Bobby, right away. Right away is the key. But, you're sort of going to these spaces that you go to already. And even Missy and Eric, I went to people that obviously had told me the story, but all they knew is what you heard in the story. They knew this land, which I confirmed, that land belonged to Margaret Boyd, and her house was probably sat back a little bit because it was more of a farm, I guess, back then, or something. Even though it wasn't a farm, it took up multiple lots. And so anyway, it was one of those things that I started to find it fascinating. I guess what I'm getting to is the story changed a little bit too, in the way that I ended up presenting it, because what I became fascinated by was that all these people weren't as weirded out by this as I was. Missy and Eric obviously thought it was really cool and were very interested in it, both from a historical standpoint and from, it being in their property and all that. But I was talking to, like I said, people that love history, and they're like, oh, well, that's weird, or, oh, there's no information about that. And what's even crazier about this, and it's something that I wanted to hit on, is that it sort of started to strike me as being this really unusual thing that even in a town with all this history, here was this sort of piece that didn't make any sense. It was literally a grave, right, that had someone's name on it, but nobody knew really whose grave it was outside of these details about this property being Margaret Boyd's and the chimney being hers. I even got to the point, and some of you might have even seen this, where I was on Facebook and I sort of was asking around, especially with the help of a few other people, kind of general questions from people in the neighborhood. And nobody, only I would say a very small percentage of the people I talked to knew what I was talking about. And yeah, it's on private property and everything. And obviously we don't really know what the story is, but it's still a bit unusual is kind of what I was getting at. And one of the really funny things, which you'll hear in the episode, which I didn't play, is that, when I talk to people and I interview people for stories, now that I'm working on, maybe a few things at once, I will talk, so if I'm interviewing someone about one thing, I will sometimes just kind of throw out the old, like, hey, I'm going to ask you about a couple other things. If you know about them, awesome. If you don't, no big deal. Just to kind of see. And Ingrid Buckley, who just finished her term as the Ohio History Corps member at the Southeast Ohio History Center, I was interviewing them about a whole nother story that's going to be in this upcoming episode, having nothing to do with this or even Athens, really. And at the end of the interview, I didn't even ask directly about this because it was just too specific. I didn't think that this story really would there would be a good question there. And somehow this came up, and Ingrid's response was, "Oh my God, Bobby." And we had this great moment where I realized that they knew what I was talking about. And that was because Ingrid grew up above the hill there. And this was the front yard brother, and they played in as kids. And then again, there's someone that's really interested in history, went to college for it, worked in public history, still continues to want to do that. And it's this kind of funny thing. There's this piece from their childhood that is, to me at least, as the outside thing, is this really interesting story, right? But that nobody seems to know anything about. So anyway, just something to think about. I hope you enjoyed the Bobby story. I do kind of want to open it up again before we head out to see if there's any other questions or anything else that anyone wanted to know about, whether it was related to that story or the previous podcasts or my upcoming project. I know, Bart, you had asked what I thought, or just public history in general, Athens, Southeast Ohio history. Bart, you asked an important question, which is you wanted to know whether Brown Avenue was named after Pat Brown. It should be. I don't know. I couldn't tell you for sure that it's not, but I believe it's named after the same Brown, probably that Brown Hall is named after. And there's a man named Brown who, if you look at old maps of Athens, it's how a lot of streets get their name. Unfortunately, white men owned the property at a time, and then they named the street after themselves. So a man named Brown, owned that land, but it could have been someone ancestrally related to Pat Brown. It's definitely within the realm of possibility. Well, I'm definitely not, for something that's supposed to be a live stream where I've talked about myself quite a bit, I'm not going to do the whole reliving my, at least you all aren't blank squares like my old Zoom classes, because that would definitely give me flashbacks. But again, I just want to kind of thank everybody who has supported this. Oh, hey, a question. You just got to scare everyone by leaving. Wow, this is a very, very good question. From Savri Media asking, do you think that the transient nature of a college town hinders or helps preserving history in that area? And I also want to mention Ron Cass, it looks like, commenting, I think it was Pat Brown, so we're going to go with that. But yeah, Savri, that's a great question. Here's what I will say. I think it helps. Sherry's right, Archibald Brown. Pat, which could be Pat's full name. Pat could be short. Most people think Pat's short for Patrick, but it could be short for Archibald. And this might be the warm fuzziness of like fall in Athens, which I actually think is kind of great, especially after the students haven't been here for a little bit. Seeing everyone on campus again and maybe feeling better about that than I normally do. Also terrified, but better overall. I think it is a beneficial thing, preserving history. And I want to give a caveat to that, though. I think it's a beneficial thing in actually preserving it and the resources and the people and the programs available to do that. In other words, even as someone that's approaching history from a local perspective, of which there's not, a specific program here in grad school or anything, I was still able to work with people in the history department and same thing. One of the things that I do that I didn't talk about too much is I work with the Our Town series. So if any of you watch or have seen the PBS series, Evan Shaw, Evan, if you're on here, I hope you are having a wonderful evening. Evan's fantastic. He's taught me a ton of stuff, teaches me stuff still all the time. And I've been lucky to work with him on that historical documentary series. So like, that's even a great example. Like, it's not in the history department. That's a college of media or school of media arts and studies, and it's at WUB, but there's still this, documentary film series about local history in towns. And that's something that wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the university. And then, of course, the things that people don't realize, I sometimes, I realize I roll in a different sphere when it comes to this stuff because I have to use this. There's an incredible university archive, so OU's archives are unbelievable. For anyone in this community, I highly suggest. There's a great digital archives. The W.E. Peters papers are online digitally, but there's tons of university stuff and town stuff, even just photos, that you can look at. And I think that is helpful there because of the university, right? To me, I think that the need for people, and this is something I've realized as someone that's doing this myself right now, is that people get into projects and they do things and they're doing thesis projects and teaching classes and producing work. And if they're a student or a grad student or a PhD or a professor, the university is involved in that in some way. And so I think actually that's like this thing that people don't see as much. I think sometimes OU, that town gown thing, you can get a bad rap sometimes, and sometimes deservedly so. But when it comes to local history, the amount that has been preserved here and the resources available to do that, I think are probably, at least if nothing else, benefit from the university being here. That being said, I also really want to support and give a shout out to the Southeast Ohio History Center, which is an unbelievable place. And my exhibition that I will be doing for the Augmented Reality Historic Marker is through them. They're going to partner on it and help me exhibit that, and they've helped me a ton. And the resources that are available there are also amazing and very good. Not every town is lucky to have that kind of a place that has so many incredible things in it, and that do so many things for the community, to show them off in new and interesting ways. And I know, again, they benefit even from having interns from the university. And so, yeah, the positive answer, hey, Lizard. Yeah, the positive answer would be that. But that being said, I wanted to give a caveat, which is that where it gets tough, and Lizard, you probably can identify with this as a musician and someone that's been around this town for a while, is it's the same problem, right? With people that are here for 4 or 5 years at a time in a rotation, maybe even less if they're in grad school or PhD program, trailing spouse, whatever it is, partner. There's so much going on here, and especially it's something I've learned. I did marketing for 12 years for Stewart's and NMF. And I was very familiar with marketing events and pushing that stuff down in Southeast Ohio. But there is just, now being outside of that role as a student and someone going through these spaces, there's so much going on, right? Not to mention all the things that I have going on that I have to do for school, let alone being an adult and functioning too. And so sometimes it's really tough. In that world of all those things going on, things get lost. And I think what I was trying to say is that for a transient population, Athens is this magical place that they go to college, right? And maybe they sometimes forget too that it's this really old place with a lot of really important history. And it really is. And I talk about this on the show a lot, and I will continue to forever and ever. But Athens and Southeast Ohio are incredibly unique because it's early American, early Republic history. But more importantly, it's this incredibly deep native history and ancient native history and incredibly deep civil rights history and Underground Railroad history and black settlement history and all of these different things, right? Labor history. And so I think that's something that, the OU student, the average OU student isn't going to know that the United Mine Workers were started 20 miles from here or that kind of stuff, So that's the tough thing. And I would say it's the same thing, like being in a band, right? Or God, I think about now how, RIP to Hoffa's Records. I think about now there's undergrads here that aren't, the union's been closed, and now it reopened obviously after COVID. But when it caught on fire and was closed even, I thought about there's all these people that were like me that were coming to school as undergrads without their record store and without like the rock and roll bar. And what do you do then? For a transient community, that means someone might be living in Athens, be super into all that stuff, but it's not there. And then they have to move. Right. But yeah, maybe it's the grad student in me that's working on my thesis that I think it's still a positive thing. There's a lot of resources there. And I do want to say too in the chat here, because while I was answering that, Sherry, you were from the living room out there talking about Archibald Brown. And this is totally like the kind of stuff I mean, you know, our Archibald Brown graduated from OU in 1822, which I would imagine was a very small class. You know, OU didn't even have, I think its first graduating class till 1806, or, you know, even later than that, 1816, something like that. You know, so it's pretty spectacular. It's not what we're thinking of now. And he established the first newspaper in Athens County, the Athens Mirror and Literary Register. So that's the precursor to the Messenger. Yeah. So there you go. There's your little detail. And I don't know if Brown House, I said Brown Hall earlier. I don't know if Brown House is named after him or not, or named after another Brown. I'm glad to answer any other questions, of course. That was a really good one. While I'm kind of giving people, you know, a little bit more chance to do that, it's a pandemic. I don't really have anywhere to be. I want to talk just a little bit more again for people that joined late, maybe about how you can help me. Again, you know, I'm going to keep doing this podcast for it's the long haul, hopefully. And so I started a Patreon page, which is below down there. Patreon.com/invisibleground, where you can support the show if you like what we do. But one of the reasons I'm also doing that is because I'm working on my MFA thesis project, which will be debuting in April of 2022. But it's related to Invisible Ground. It's under the banner of Invisible Ground and co-presented by the Southeast Ohio History Center as well. And if you want to support the show and also this huge separate production that's related to it, you can do so by going to Patreon. And that's a monthly membership thing. So you can give based on a couple different levels. And then you could cancel it at any time. It comes out on the first of the month. So actually, even right now, if you're listening and you're like, man, Brian's super interesting and I really want to support his work, you could go there right now and sign up for whatever level, and you will not get charged until the first. And then you can cancel it at any time. And I just, since I have a minute, want to talk about some of the things that I'm doing for that. So that page also serves as a depository for this stuff. You know, I'll keep doing behind the scenes thing. I'm going to keep doing these streams. This even will exist there as a podcast of sorts, an extra one after the fact. But I'm going to bring in collaborators that I'm working with and stuff, and different people, you know, from this kind of world of the show. And then, you know, that will also feature different perks that are a little more specific depending on the level. So for a couple, if you go up to the $3 a month, I'm making stickers, sweet stickers. I'm actually working on a few different designs right now to support the show. If you go up to $5 a month, I'm working with my very good friend and very talented artist, Sarah Brown at Questionable Press, to make some really sweet art print postcards, letterpress art print. And she's going to start messing with them this weekend even. So both of those things I'm hoping to have ready for before the holidays to send out to people. The other thing I want to mention too, and I'll be putting this up on there, is that, of course, in addition to doing this, I mentioned music and stuff. I've helped run Aqua Bear Legion for years with Todd Jacobs, and we have a couple cassettes coming out here in a few weeks. And so one thing I wanted to do, since it's all kind of the same world, is anybody who supports the Patreon or has supported it already will be getting downloads of all that stuff. I'm going to be sending you kind of downloads of those couple albums just kind of as a fun additional thing. And I'm going to be putting up on Patreon, and I'll include anyone who gives tonight. I will be putting on, you'll get a bonus Aqua Bear record. We put out one right at the beginning of the pandemic, a compilation. So if you give this week, I'll have 10 of those or something. The next 10 people that sign up for the Patreon, I'll give you one of those. And even if it's not in your thing, if you sign up for $5 or more, let's say, we'll throw a record in there and everyone will get the downloads. Hey, Terry, thanks. Terry Eiler there. Terry, again, another wonderful School of Visual Communication faculty. And I took a wonderful magazine class, Advanced Photo Reportage from Terry. And of course, no surprise, made a history magazine. So that was also fun. And Lizard, I got another good one from you here too, which is, do you think Invisible Ground will focus on or stay in Athens County Or do you ever have any urge to focus on or go back to your roots in Lorraine? Man, that's a great question. Todd with the L-Town. Todd, you heard my shout out for you. Good. Yeah, I'm from Lorraine originally. I've been in Athens for 20 years now, geez, which is nuts. But yeah, to answer your question, definitely. You know, what's really cool about this project, both the podcast and this production I'm working on for my thesis, is that, I guess let me back up a second. One thing that, besides loving history and wanting more people to get into this stuff and that being a reason to pick the topic of doing this, the other piece of it is that when you're doing storytelling, whether it's film, audio, animation, game, anything, I would imagine, writing, you need a good story and good characters and interesting stuff, right? So history to me, especially these sort of public history, these micro histories, if you were, provide that, you know, they're awesome. It's already there. So that being said, you know, the cool part about a show like this is that this is a Southeast Ohio history podcast right now, but it doesn't have to be limited to that. And same thing with the production, you know, I live here, so these stories are always going to be part of this show. Even if I go do stories somewhere else, there's always going to be Athens and Southeast Ohio stories. But that being said, I do think that it's something that would benefit from moving around for a lot of reasons, you know, being able to make it interesting and bring in new people, that helps, right? But yeah, I think about Lorraine a lot anyway, but boy, it's been kicking around in my brain a lot since I've been working on this, because there's so much history. Even the project I was talking about related to this augmented reality historic markers I'm doing for my thesis, combined with audio, Lorraine would be perfect for that. There's so much deep labor history there too, and international history and everything. So yeah, I think, you know, that same approach that I'm taking to these stories could apply to other places for sure. And also really quick, you know, the Rust Belt and Appalachia have a lot of similarities. There's a lot of overlap there. And for those people who I know who've grown up there and lived down here for a while, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's different, but there's that labor history, that working class history, and that sort of those deep roots, and a lot of international immigrants from all over the place building this stuff, you know, extractive industries, all of this is all tied together. Sherry, you are right. I believe, Ron, that those are different Browns. But it's possible it could be somebody related. You know, there's a lot of Browns. Athens is lousy with Browns. Probably the same, you know, there's Brown Road too, right? Yeah. Bob Fedeschi, hey, Bob, says you definitely agree histories of local periods, eras reflect those times more intimately than an overview of larger blocks of time. Yeah, I completely agree. And I want to mention a few things about that, but I get to your other comment here. You say so many tales over the last 50 years. You're right. Recent history, Bob. That's new. That's modern history. You're a young man in that terms. We all are. Ethelred Eldridge, a hero and fascinating figure of mine for sure. Swanky's J.D. Hutchison, local legends whose influence has traveled far beyond Athens. And I agree completely. Musically, art-wise, you know, this is an incredibly rich town. And Ethelred might tie into, I plan on trying to do some justice in an audio version to the story of Jonathan Coons and Mount Nebo at some point. Hopefully get Sharon Hatfield to help me out with that. Dan, hey buddy. Do you find it difficult to enjoy digging into early history knowing that it comes so quickly on the heels? I think you're going to probably say something. I don't know how you're going to finish that thought. I feel like I maybe started saying that too quick. I see where you're going. Oh, yeah, of purging native people. So a few things there. That's a very good question, Dan. Essentially what you're asking is hard to dig into this stuff, and how do I deal with that? Because it's tough. Tough isn't even the word. It's when you really dig into it, you know. So some people think there's these few versions, right? There's the general washover, whitewash history of everything's fine, right? And natives they left. I've even seen history books that say they left. They got out of the way so that we could settle here. They wanted to get out of there. And it's the same kind of history books you'll find. They'll say things like, you know, slavery was great for African Americans, or it wasn't so bad back then. And that's all terrible. And honestly, this is my podcast and my live stream. I'll say it's all bullshit. And I exist to try to stop that, as best I can. I don't act as a hero for those things. And so this is part of the answer to that. But I know I can do what I can as a storyteller, as a historian, as a person who produces, as an artist, as a producer who makes things to address that. And I think that maybe it carries, again, I'm a white man doing it. So depending on who it is, it carries more weight or less weight. I might trick you into listening to me because you think I'm going to not talk about that stuff. But I try to talk about that stuff as much as I can and be aware of my own cultural biases and the fact that I can't speak for that, right? I can draw attention to it. I can bring people in. I can curate the history. I can research and try to find the story to tell. But it's something I've I thought about it so much as I was preparing to go back to school because I knew it'd be something I'd have to deal with. And I think I just dove headlong into it. And yeah, my first story for Inside Appalachia was about the indigenous roots of the pawpaw and about how the pawpaw is a Shawnee and an indigenous fruit. In fact, pawpaw is the word for the month of September in Shawnee means pawpaws. It's time for pawpaws, essentially the pawpaw harvest. And, yeah. So how does this tribe in Oklahoma have a word for pawpaw when there's barely any pawpaws out there? So tied to their culture? Well, it's because they were here and because we threw them out of here. So there's I sort of dove into that. And those of you, I think, Dan, you probably too asking that question, know me well. I think that was kind of the only way I could deal with it was I wasn't going to dance around it. And my first story on public radio was about Native American and the pawpaw. And I got to say things like forced removal and genocide and stuff and talk about that stuff and not beat around the bush. And so with Invisible Ground, I try to do the same thing, and then again, try to point out the stuff that is uplifting, in the first episode of West 8th Street Cemetery. And that story about Andrew Jackson Davison is devastating, right? But also amazing that here's this W.E. Peters in 1945, a white man who's a lawyer in this town, in the same courthouse that doesn't have Andrew Jackson Davison's picture up until the kids from Athens Middle School got it put up recently. And Peters is not going to get him in the courthouse. Maybe he can't do that for whatever reason. I'm not gonna try to understand the guy too much, but he goes and finds out where he's buried in an unmarked grave in West 8th Street Cemetery. He finds out his story. He, as Tom O'Grady says, he puts it in a stone and he puts it on the ground. He spends his money on that. And then not only marks that story, he saves it. As I said before, he amplifies the story. He saves it there, right? And then these students from the middle school come along and form a club about Andrew Jackson Davison and make a documentary about him and draw attention to his story even more. It's amazing. So I think that that's the power of those things. And, while I'm aware of my own biases and the places that I can and cannot step, I will never, ever. I got into history as a huge reader of Howard Zinn, and I stand by that stuff a lot when I think of my principles and approaches to things. I'm here to tell the story of the people, even in a minimum way, of a small version of a tiny story needs to be of the people that haven't been heard. There's enough of that, And yeah, sure, you're going to have stories like in the Marietta one, like about Commodore Whipple, right? But that's a great story too. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to tell those two. It's just, that's not one maybe that you hear all the time too. But yeah, it sucks. The other part of that, Dan, I was going to say, is taking grad level history class. You sort of realize I had never done that until last year. And I was with a couple PhD students and a few master's students in history. I was the non-history person. And Dr. Brian Shane, he's a fantastic professor and also really well-versed in all of this stuff, more so than me. It was something that we sort of realized as a group right away, like, oh, everybody knows that these horrible things happen. And we talked about it a lot. It wasn't like okay, we're all operating at the base level. We all were aware of it, but it came up a lot. It was discussed a lot. But yeah, it's hard. It's depressing sometimes. Andrew Chicky Yeah, Andrew's in the first episode as well. And I saw you today. I hope you didn't get too wet on the way back to your office. That was a great question. I agree. Being honest about early settlers and the interactions with the native populations can be really difficult to wrap your head around. And I agree firmly. You know, our town has done a great job of teaching me about that too. That, you know, those ways that they connect, you can be honest about them, and you need to be honest about them. That stuff moves forward. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? And so to understand those things, you kind of got to understand those whole viewpoints. But yeah, I don't know if anyone saw, I think probably the best example of that, that's both the most wonderful, like awe-inspiring, great story, and the one that makes you more sad than anything in the world is the mound that's on Bridge Street in Chillicothe, which is located in a parking lot in front of a Five Guys. And it's where the original mound was. Amazing folks, same person who's doing a lot of that great work out in the plains and scanning these earthworks right now, saved that mound essentially from when they were developing the shopping center, got it rebuilt, put all the things they found back into it, had a ceremony from the appropriate people to do that, and then got whatever the guy that owns Dick's Sporting Goods or owned that one to, put up a sign saying that, essentially saying the story. And so you could look at that by being like, oh my God, this is what people do. Why is this in front of the Five Guys? Or you could look at that and say, holy crap, it's amazing that this little bit was saved. But you can't think about that story correctly without knowing the way that natives and white people interact. It's the same thing as now. Liz, Paul, you're the best. Those were all great questions. Thank you. You're so nice. That's so sweet. Liz also too, I'll plug you. Geez, you have a great film that I'm hoping you're putting up online at some point. That debuted at Stewart's Opera House last week. Ron Cass, you had a comment that I wanted to address quick as we wrap up, and I could probably do another question or two still if anyone had any more. Invisible Ground. Yeah. I'm glad you think it's a great name. I do too. Yeah. I used to probably not say stuff like that, but in my older age, I do now. It came to me, and I wanted, it was one of those things like when the most intimidating thing for me, besides starting a new career and going back to school and trying to learn this stuff, that was scary. But my experience with projects, whether it's Aqua Bear Legion or the Nelsonville Music Festival or Stewart's or any of this stuff, is names are huge, right, Liz and Ron and all these people that are asking questions. The Nelsonville Music Festival could have been called something else. And even that, right? Like, but we would have been saying it forever. There's a lot of weight to that, right? And I kept thinking, I didn't know when I started the podcast that it was going to be my thesis for sure, but I knew it was going to probably be related. And so there's a lot of pressure, I've been in enough bands where you pick a name randomly or something like that. This was not one of those things. I wanted it to come to me, but I also knew it needed to be something that I was going to be cool with saying like 300 times, to put it politely. And so, yeah, it just kind of came. I had been thinking about, I had one of those great lists of just random words, thinking about the kinds of stories that I wanted to tell and this sort of ethos that I had for telling them. And I really wanted to figure out some way to make it seem a little mysterious, but also give people the idea that this stuff is kind of all around them, but is being uncovered, right? We'll get to that question in a minute, Bart. But yeah, so Invisible Ground just kind of seemed perfect. And it had this, right, yeah, Liz, right? It was the Nelsonville Art and Music Festival. It was NAMF. And in fact, when I started there, that was what we called it, Liz, in the office. NAMF. NYMF now. And yeah, names stick with things, right? There's people that still call the Nelsonville Music Festival the Hockhocking Folk Festival. Probably not as many anymore. My dad, Ken Costco, for the longest time when we were kids, kept calling Dairy Mart Lawson's because that's what it was called, and CVS Revco, right? Everybody's parents and grandparents, and not even just that, everybody does that. So I wanted to make it Casual Future. Yeah, I wanted to make it something that would live on, like Casual Future, and have some meaning. And it felt, Invisible Ground seemed like a cool concept. With a podcast too, you need to get it. It's totally different, right? With a band, you can name it something like unmonumental. With a podcast, I need to make someone think about wanting to listen to it just from doing it for a second, seeing it for a second. Top 5 Athens graveyards in order, DJ Bardicus. We're talking Athens County. I'll wait for the clarification on that. That's a perfect one to end on. I imagine we're talking Athens County. Athens City only has 3, right? More than that if you count the ridges. Jeez, man, that's tough. So yeah, you're referencing the first 2 episodes, of course, were about cemeteries. There'll be cemetery will come up more, but they're not all going to be about cemeteries. But the reason I started with cemeteries was because it was perfect. It is this place that exists, that is in almost every community, that people see, people live next to, that they interact with, they walk by on the way to work. But they contain all this history. They contain the story of all these people that lived in the same place before us. So that was kind of why I started there. It seemed like a good starting place. But man, Athens County cemeteries, geez. Well, I love West State Street's number 1, hands down. Hands down. For those of you that listen to that episode, if you haven't, go listen to it. It's the first one I did. That was where I worked. I worked there the summer after I graduated from OU, and I weed whacked the graves and painted that fence. And when I got too hot, I stood in the air conditioning at Arts West. Emily Prince would let me in there when they had just opened up. But that's the place. Right in the middle of town. It's old. There's so many stories there. There's so many stories there that nobody knows about. There's this whole W.E. Peters thing, which is just incredible. There's Revolutionary War veterans there. Guy who crossed the Delaware, escaped slave. He changed his name and owned property in Athens as early as, the 1840s or whatever. And then also I got to give a shout out to the Ridges, of course. I'll group that as one. I don't know if that's my second favorite, but that's just an incredible story. There's some great ones up there too. Fort Street Cemetery in Nelsonville is an interesting one. Just a cool physical location, kind of going up this huge hillside. There's some really old graves there too. Daniel Nelson, who Nelsonville is named after, is buried there. And I'm paraphrasing because my head is full of too much stuff these days, but he has a wonderful inscription on his grave, essentially kind of hinting at the fact that he is definitely coming back from there. So that's got to get in there. Getting a chance to go around with David Butcher to the 2 cemeteries he took me to, which one is one of the oldest ones in Athens, the Pioneer Cemetery outside of Stewart, which is next to his farm, and the Kilvert Cemetery are both just incredible. That Pioneer Cemetery, it's graves from late 1790s. There's Jewish graves there. And I mean, you're talking, this is like 15, 20 people overlooking Federal Creek, right about where it goes into the Hocking. So it's just this really early spot. And of course, Kilvert, for those of you who watched the Taylortown video I did or listen to the podcast that'll be coming up, you'll hear about that. Yeah, number 5's got to be Bobby. Dan's right. the one grave cemetery. Bobby with an honorable mention to Clark's Chapel. I like Clark's Chapel a lot, and it's close to the town. It's a beautiful place. Even that, Clark's Chapel, I think there's someone buried there from Normandy. There's someone, there's just, it's crazy. There's just so much in all these places. Yeah, Ron, you're totally right. The earth is our history. Entire history is on the face of the earth, in the ground, hidden to the eye. And that is sort of the idea. All right, I'm going to wrap up here. This has been awesome. You all are great. I will plug all this stuff one more time here below. If you would like to support the podcast and this bigger augmented reality project, you can go to patreon.com/invisibleground. Again, it's a monthly donation. You can cancel it anytime. I have a $1 a month, $3 a month, $5, $10, $25. And those higher ones, I should mention quick, the 10 and 25. If you have a business, that $10 a month has, you can be an episode sponsor of a future show. The $25 a month thing, that seems like a lot, but you could be an episode sponsor, or we could do a project together. That is a freelance level. So you get me to work with you on something for a few hours. I'm really good at designing graphics, doing posters. I'm great at recording audio. I can do research for you on family history, whatever you want. But yeah, those smaller levels are huge too. Every little bit helps. I am thankful I received a grant from Ohio Humanities to at least kick off some of this project and pay for some of my expenses. But, a lot of it's scraping on my own too. And so every little bit helps with that. My top 5 can change by the day, DJ Bardicus. But if you want to throw me a few bucks a month, that would be awesome. Like I said, you can cancel at any time, and you also will not get charged until October 1st. So you can go do that right now and get some stuff in return. And if you don't want to give me money, that's fine too. Totally understand that. And you can do tons of stuff for free that can help the show out. Tell your friends about it, share it with people. And I will tell you seriously here, right now, while I have 10 people at least listening to me, the biggest thing you can do for the show, besides the Patreon, is you can go on Apple Podcasts, you can rate it, hopefully a favorable rating, and then you can write a very short review, like actually type a review. The more of those that happen, it's huge. Those kind of things get me into algorithms and things that I can't normally get into. And I say that just because, like all of you and everyone else in the world, I look at my phone all the time. You can do this all from your phone. It would take like a minute or two, and it would be a huge help. So if you go to the Apple Podcast for search Invisible Ground, you find us on there. Just rate us and type an actual review and subscribe. Those 3 things are like they're huge. But again, if you support in this next little bit, the next 10 people that sign up for the Patreon at $3 or more, let's say a month, I'm going to send you a copy of Aquabear Legion Volume 7 on vinyl. We've got extra ones, and I want to get them out there. And then everybody that's supported so far, I'll be sending you some downloads for the new projects for that too. Thanks again. And it goes without saying, I've mentioned this before in the Nelsonville stuff, but it's always really encouraging to get cool questions and get people that are into this stuff. It means a lot because I'm really into it, but when you're doing different things, you never quite know. So thank you very, very much. You can reach me at findinvisibleground@gmail.com. Like us on socials, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. Toss some money our way. And support your local history center too. Thanks, everybody.